We're live.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to another amazing Swarm event. We're very excited today to introduce Edward Messick, who is an experienced bioinformatician. He has a very strong background in genomics, biotechnology, and pharmaceutical industries. His expertise spans bioinformatics, software and algorithmic development, machine learning, pharmaceuticals and diagnostic development, as well as lab automation, which is I'll tell you from my own experience, that's a phenomenal background. So cheers, Edward. Edward's also skilled in business and market analysis. He has a proven ability to build valuable business relationships and collaborations across multiple sectors based on his experience. He'll now speak to us today about how polygenic risk scores and AI can work together to lead towards a more personalized medicine experience in humans. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shaista. That was a great intro. It's almost like I wrote it myself. Let me share my screen now. Share screen. Okay. Okay. Let me make this. Is this full screen for you now? Okay. It's good enough. So yeah, today I'll be speaking on how polygenic modeling and polygenic risk scores are poised to change human healthcare at the moment. So AI and genomics generally has ushered in a new era of healthcare. There's a lot of monogenics. There's a lot of panels in different diseases like cancer that have proven to be very useful across a range of applications. And over the past 15 years, polygenic risk scores have really been on the rise in academia, and now they're ready to enter the clinic. So there's some exciting stuff happening. And there, importantly to the session at hand, is how can AI address some challenges that implementing polygenic risk scores face. Everybody's seen this chart before if you've ever seen a genomics talk in your life. And that's just showing that the cost per human genome is still decreasing over time, which correlates to increases in genomic data in these large genomic databases, which then improves the accuracy of these models. So getting back to the topic, in this presentation, I'm going to discuss PRS, other data modalities you can combine with it, and the methods to address the limitations. So that they may translate to the clinic. So let me just start with what is a polygenic risk score. There are statistical calculations based on the presence or absence of multiple genomic variants. So in each gene, we have different genomic variants. That's why we're different than each other in various ways, including when it comes to disease risk. I always like to say that the reason that I'm different than Shaquille O'Neal and can't dunk a basketball like him isn't because of one or a few genes. It's because of thousands to millions of genes. And I think the traditional model has pushed us toward a monogenic thinking for pharma, like discovery. But going back to this chart, you can see that there's a distribution based on these thousands to millions of variants that add up. Each one of these variants over here, they add up to a minor effect or a large effect if they're like a highly impactful gene. And you can basically stratify people by risk for a lot of these common diseases now, because those common diseases are found in large numbers in these genomic databases. So you can build these polygenic models that associate thousands to millions of genes, and then they have an additive effect, which can be very predictive. So this is how they can be used to stratify risk. The right is a similar distribution as before, but maybe this table puts it in better context. There are kind of these ranges that often show large increases in clinical risk. So in the top 1 percentile of polygenic risk, often you'll see big multipliers, and often these polygenic risks are as predictive, if not more predictive, than monogenic predictors like the BRCA mutation. Everybody's heard of that for breast cancer, and they screen for that. Polygenic risk is actually more predictive, then BRCA will also include BRCA, right? Because it's a single gene. It'll be in these models as well. So it's kind of readjusting the approach to genomics to how genomics should be done. And of course, the monogenic stuff and these well-studied genes are more interpretable. So that's one of the big challenges of polygenics is, how can you get people to use these without necessarily understanding the millions of genes to the depth you would like a BRCA variant. But let me show you a quick visualization of how powerful these can be. So in the top 10% of coronary artery disease polygenic score, you can see that it's 3.7 times more predictive than these traditional biomarkers that clinicians are using every day. So there's been surveys of primary care physicians, and I think something like 90% said polygenic risk scores would be useful to them, and yet able 1% are using them in some capacity. So it's a big gap to be addressed in the clinic. So I kind of went into this already, but what is the potential of it? Yes, it can provide insights to predispositions to diseases, but it can also be pretty predictive, and preventive healthcare is on the rise now. So it's a really important thing to be able to predict your risk over your lifetime, so you can take steps in your lifestyle with your clinician, your physicians, to maybe screen early or to maybe get on a statin early, for example. So personalized healthcare, it's a key element that is kind of missing right now in personalized healthcare. And if you think about it, a lot of these biomarkers that you measure, they can be transient. They can be that month, that day. Maybe you do something, eat differently, and your cholesterol comes down, but your genes are always there. So you always have a dosage of those genes until one day we can actually do gene editing. But so it's a really important and impactful factor is the point. So there are some challenges, and this is where AI is going to come in. I'm going to get to the AI stuff. Don't worry. I just need to set the stage of what are polygenics for all of you. So they do have limitations in accuracy. There's various reasons for that. But the databases are rapidly growing. Right now, most of the models are built on these things called microarrays, which cover highly variable genes, variants that are good at predicting differences between people. But it's about 800,000 to 1 million. In the future, when we have whole genome sequencing on everybody, these should improve. When we can add things like deletions and duplications and things like that, these should improve. But they're still like pretty accurate, especially for common diseases. And when you combine them with other data that bridges that gap to the clinical data, then they become extremely accurate. So that's kind of what I'm working on now at my company, Polycipher, little plug. But there's other issues to be addressed with polygenic risk scores. Portability across ancestries. Most of these databases are just Europeans. That's changed. That's getting addressed. But there's ways to take those models and port them to other ancestries. Certain diseases are better to match your ancestry specific model. Other ones, you want to use a multi-ancestry model where there's a shared genetic landscape. So it's a rapid area of study, and it's super interesting to me. And I think it'll elucidate actual genetic pathways in the future. So it's, I think just the polygenic mindset, I like to call it, is a new way of thinking that a lot of geneticists are adapting now. And yeah, so it also could increase health disparity because of these differences in databases. There's these huge European databases, but there are quite a few diverse databases. and there are quite a few from other countries in Asia, in Africa, and so this is all improving now, but these are existing problems. Okay, so why is it the right time? I think I've touched on a lot of this, but about 30% of the world's data is from the healthcare industry. That's pretty crazy. So that's just sitting there, and now LLMs and these amazing AI technologies have come about. And so why not combine these two things, use this wealth of healthcare data and gain some knowledge from it? As I showed before, DNA sequencing costs are still plummeting. It's getting very cheap to do whole genome sequencing. It's already extremely cheap to do microarray sequencing, which I'll explain how you bridge the gap between the two later with imputation, which is a machine learning AI method. And then right now, PRS is on the path to becoming part of mainstream medicine. I think it's inevitable for all the reasons I said before, but it's also in clinical trials. So it's not just all talk. There's real clinical trials happening, and I'll highlight those later, including one that I hope to do soon. And then AI is ripe for disrupting industries, as you've all seen throughout these talks. So it's pretty good timing to talk about PRS. Again, let's just quantify that a little bit. So the y-axis here isn't great, but it's relative frequency in books over time. I don't know what it's relative to, but I just use Google Ngram to rough this up, but it's just showing the exponential increase. And then on the bottom, there's been an exponential increase in polygenic risk score studies published every year. And it's funny, if you go back to before genes were even discovered, this is how physicists modeled genetics from Darwinian inheritance. So there was actually a mention all the way back, kind of a mention, not the word polygenic, back in like the early 1900s. But then we went down the pharma route for monogenics, and now we're coming back to how we really do genetics, in my opinion. Okay, so applications again. Don't worry, I'm getting to the cool AI stuff soon. These are just the areas or points in time where they could be most impactful. So from birth risk prediction, like knowing your risk, even before, there's actually a point before in the IVF industry where some prior work I did at this company, Genomic Prediction, which is the first clinical application, was applying polygenic risk scores to rank embryos for people doing IVF. And you would see that, the top end of the group of embryos would have way less risk than another group. So you would want to minimize like risk of diabetes, heart disease, and things. If you're choosing to do that test, it's a little controversial, but there's a lot of PGT testing going on in general to make sure you don't have miscarriage. But this is for disease prevention. And then in the future, it should be happening, or ideally should be happening from birth. So your risk over your lifetime and can mitigate that. When you get early symptoms, it can be prognostic. So it can, help you predict your disease progression. Like if you have higher polygenic risk, you'll probably have worse prognosis, which is also down there at the end, and in all these steps. So it's just a support tool right now for clinicians until these get much more accurate. But like I said, they're more accurate than people think. So it's translating it to the clinic. But then at the bottom, I listed some other applications because there's a ton of cool applications outside of just healthcare that are like, some of them are even cooler, I think. So yeah, just disease prediction in general, preventive medicine, screening. You can actually find causal genes with this. I I can go into that later, but I need to get to the key slides. Clinical trials, stratification, and drug discovery is an awesome application. Pharmacogenomics, again, there's multifaceted elements of drug clearance and all of that. So they're only looking at like one enzyme or one gene typically. So there's actually a polygenic element, and clinical decision support and public health screening, because there are these large databases in some countries like Estonia where you can screen the whole country. And if you have a single payer healthcare system, it could be really cost effective for them. Okay, let me get to it. So, okay, that's a little blurry, but I'll explain what that is. But machine learning is central, or AI is central to computing these polygenic risk scores. So where are they used? It's for training models. It's for imputing more genes from these microarrays to a larger set. It's in layering in pathways and discovering causal variants, which is something that's being pioneered right now. Now you can use LLMs here for interpretation, possibly for bringing in information from databases about these variants and then explaining their impact, almost like a genetic counselor, in communicating this stuff to healthcare and clinics. Over here, what these plots are showing are how ancestry adjustments are done. Essentially, you project with something like PCA a ancestry against a panel of people, like 1,000 genomes, and then you adjust the mean, the median, and the variance to match. That's a crude method, but there's a lot of benefit just from that. And this is where AI can improve things. We're going to have to develop better methods to do this. And then nonlinear models, which are super interesting, which actually show the network effect of genes. It's not even being done yet. And, some groups are researching this, Broad Institute and stuff. But let me move on. So I've covered a lot of this, but just for the people who will see the recording, you have this slide here. I'd like to highlight how to improve accuracy and translating clinical outcomes. The study that I did right here was showing relative risk reduction of using polygenic risk scores to select embryos against like random selection, which is what they're doing now. But you can do the same comparison to not using polygenic risk scores or to using traditional clinical measures, or using both together, right? And you can get the relevant risk reduction, which is a trial I'm running right now. And the best trial is Dr. Vassi from Harvard, working with the Boston VA. It's called the Progress Study. He is really the pioneer of this field. And then the VA has announced a new testing ground with the FDA for these types of technologies with AI. So there's other ways you can pair AI with it, with chatbots that can support, that can discuss with like a clinician. So, these are other ways you can refine the models, increasing databases, like I've said, more diverse databases, combining them. Million Veteran Program's a great database because it's very diverse in the US. There's people with multi-ancestry in there too, which is tougher. Then you can integrate other types of data with AI, like poly-exposure data. I'd like to highlight her Yi's study. I met her and she's doing awesome stuff with EHRs and exposure. So like your zip code matters because your environment matters. And these massively boost the models to like over 0.9, 0.95 AUC, meaning they're like very accurate. Integrating EHRs, more targeted models. And then there's this thing called the pangenome. Everybody's using this single reference genome now for things, which is kind of based on one European guy. And there's the pangenome now based on thousands of different people. So it's calling those variants differently. Here's some I don't know if I have time. Do I have time? I have 2 more slides.
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead. We'll get through them and we'll leave about 5 minutes
Okay.
for Q&A.
I'm just going to leave this up. These are the current methods for training. Maybe I should have gotten to this faster, but these are there's a lot of linear methods like lasso, which come from kind of the physics world. And it's just a linear regression model. Then there's other Bayesian methods that are used to find these values of association between each gene, and then you add them up together. But it's pretty simple, but still powerful now. So I think in the future, using nonlinear models is going to have massive benefit. And then improving our panels, and imputation is another step where AI can come in. So you impute from a small set of genes to a larger set of genes, and that increases your predictability. Improving that method in the panels would be really useful. And so integrating omic data, I already talked about. There's so many other types of omic data, and that's right here. So what other data can we integrate? And AI is huge in this, right? Like, and using neural nets and all types of different methods, LSTMs, like layering this and figuring out how to actually do it is super important and hard work. But these are some other things: healthcare surveys, family history, which I worked on in the past, epigenetics, which is hard, but possibly doable one day, proteomics. We have protein prediction winning the Nobel Prize this year. That's AI. Microbiome is super impactful. Immunological data, imaging data, all this other type of healthcare data can be integrated with polygenics models or paired with it. And then we'll have insane predictive power. So that's it.
Brilliant, Edward. A fantastic presentation, and thank you for sharing that very detailed bit of knowledge with us. Few questions off the top of my head, and if there's anyone in the audience that has questions, we're happy to take some as well. But I'll start with how well would you, based on your experience, how well do you think that genetic testing can predict the likelihood of a disease, of acquiring a disease in the average person? And with that, is it possible to do affiliation studies where you can combine the genotype and phenotype towards making those predictions? So I'll just give you about 1 minute to answer that, and we've got 2 more. So how well can predictions be made for disease acquisition, and then the phenotype and genotypes?
Okay, how well? I would say their positive predictive value of the current linear models can range from 0.7 to 0.8, so like 70 to 80% accurate. But again, you add in the phenotype information, you add in their healthcare data to bridge the gap between their genetic potential and their lifestyle and what's really happening. That's what you're getting 90 to 100% accuracy. 95, I would never say 100 actually, but it's very predictive. It's just the stringency for getting that FDA approved and getting the clinic to believe that, with thousands to millions of variants that you have to kind of explain what they're doing, right? For them is a big challenge. But I think it's going to sit kind of as a decision support tool for a while, and for more population risk stratification, or as a personal tool. I didn't touch on 23andMe, which kind of created DTC. Like what we're doing at Polycipher is B2B, but they kind of not poisoned the well of DTC consumer genetics, but the way they do their diseases aren't polygenic. They'll give you 4 SNPs. So they're not accurate. So it's
You're
all
doing
in.
genome-wide, are you?
Yes, exactly. Genome-wide association studies are essentially how you get these values. But we're doing as many genes as we can. So our goal is to get the most accuracy, squeeze out every little bit. Yeah.
Which is, I guess, everybody's interest is in accuracy. Which takes us to the next point. How big is the challenge in your specific field of work to stratify groups and to stratify diseases so that you find causation rather than association from these data sets?
No, it's super important, like I said, to translate it. And just in general, I think it's an interesting scientific question. I guess, yeah. So, I mean, you can look at ancestries, right? Some ancestries have higher frequencies of certain variants and higher frequencies of the gene. I mean,
Yeah,
the
so for
disease,
example,
is
like
that a cultural thing or is that the real gene,
well, I
right?
mean,
So,
you've got like polymorphic receptor mutations in the Southeast Asian population that has been found by association to be correlated with a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. Is it a
right,
causative or is it an associative? Or
exactly.
sarcoidosis clinically, we know that is more predominant in African populations. Is that an association, a lifestyle association, or a genetic?
That
So, how much can
amazing
you
question.
satisfy that?
That's a great question. So, I mean, like I said, yeah, it could be a cultural thing. It could be that, that culture eats a certain way or lives a certain way. So there are methods now that people are working on that we're using to do causal variant discovery to tease out, oh, is this actually related? Then layering in these pathways like actual biological knowledge where people have done these studies, they've studied this gene, they've studied the pathways it can impact. I think there's so much where AI can come in and find that. So yeah,
I hope
it's
that's a
super.
promising avenue for AI. I think we
It
missed that
is.
in
It really
clinical.
is. No, that's a great question because especially with this protein prediction stuff, right? Then you get down to the actual structure. You can one day predict where this is binding, what it's doing in the body, and maybe explain a whole polygenic risk score, right? But I also think it's important to say that it doesn't necessarily matter when you're predicting disease risk if it is causal or not, because it's still predictive.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
to a
people
clinician,
usually
they don't want
want
to
to
hear
know
that.
if it's causative or just by association. Next question,
Yeah,
and we've got about 2 minutes left, so you'll have
sure.
some free. What are practical methods that you see for the now and then for the near future to make this PRS AI combination more equitable and more fairly accessible? So you've got like nations in the global
Yeah,
south and in the north, and there's a disparity in both the representation of the data, but then also in accessing the technology. So what are practical methods to increase the fairness of the data and increase the access?
that's a great question. So I touched on a little bit about multi-ancestry models. It's finding the underlying landscape of disease that could be shared across ancestries, but it's also getting into those databases, getting grants, getting building a platform that's portable to all of these different databases. So that's what I'm doing with imputation. So I can take any chip, any microarray, and impute it with lower variance that, and then building specific models on the other end to that database. So it's just going to take work of actually building these project models for like South Asians, for whatever, and then clinically deploying them, which is the work like Vasi and I'm doing. And it's a big challenge to bridge that gap, but I think the clinical trials will start and then some will conclude soon and show that, yes, you can predict accurately. We already know that from the genomic database studies, but can you make a change? Can you actually improve your prognosis or the rates at which you get a disease by knowing, right? And there's so much evidence that knowing your genetic risk leads to you taking interventions at a higher
Yeah,
rate. But
I
yeah,
suppose this is just the first step is once we found these causation, these associations or causations, then the next phase of personalized medicine, which is treating and then preventative medicine towards, I guess, a utopic ideal situation where we have, Medcare pods and it can tell you your risk and fix it, maybe with some CRISPR editing in the future.
yeah. Well, hopefully AI can just figure out why we age and then we don't have to worry about any of this. But
I'll be the first to invest if you do that one.
well, people are working on that too. But I think understanding our polygenic landscape is so key to that and everything. So these common diseases are the first ones, but soon rare disease too will be part of this because everything has a polygenic landscape. So even if you have a monogenic disease, there's a polygenic modifier to that. So it's just like part of the toolkit that we have to include. To touch back on what you were asking is we just have to do the work in these other countries. We have to get more initiatives to make it more diverse because like you
More
can
collaborative.
more collaborative, like, and then there's subgroups of each ancestry, right? Like, so it's not like everybody in
That's
India
not an
is the
infinite
same.
task in that case, isn't it? Infinite.
Well, there are some clusters. That's where the math comes in.
We're out of time, and I
Where
just want to thank you for
yeah.
your brilliance and for extending your knowledge. And thank you very much. We appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Shai. We're going to keep this energy and we're going to transmute it into the next session. So we're just going to take a brief break and we'll be back in about 20 minutes. So stay tuned for more.
Great. Thanks.